The title of the talk tonight is How Newfoundland and Labrador Commemorated Their World War I Casualties Who Had No Known Graves. And our speakers tonight are two very exciting individuals. We have Major retired Michael Preddy and Dr. Ian Parsons. Ian Parsons is a family physician with an interest in sports medicine who's practiced in northern Canada and rural Newfoundland and Labrador and St. John's over the past 45 years. He's a professor in the discipline of family medicine at Memorial University. His family members have an extensive interest in history, particularly in Newfoundland and Labrador, and in medical and First World War history, where three of his grandparents and many other relatives served. He considers himself an amateur historian and is co-author with David Parsons of The Best Small Boat Seaman in the Navy, Newfoundland Royal Naval Reserve 1900 to 1922. And he has been involved in numerous tours of Great War battlefields and is a member of several Great War interest groups. His interest is in individual stories of those who served or were related to those who served, specifically Newfoundlanders. He is a bagpiper and has been a pipe major in the local pipe band in the Northwest Territories, and he has also attended 4 Paralympic Games as a medical member of Team Canada. He lives in St. John's and is married to Jane Duffett. They have 2 children and grandchildren who have already, very excited for us to hear, shown interest in history. Our other speaker tonight is Major retired Michael Preddy, who grew up in Western Newfoundland and is 5th generation to serve in the military. He retired in 2013 with 33 years of service, having served in numerous positions in Canada and overseas, and he has several United Nations tours in Cyprus, the former Republic of Yugoslavia, and the Ukraine, as well as several other smaller missions. He received a regimental commendation, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, for his work as a forward air controller in Bosnia, specifically the Sarajevo and Srebrenica areas in 1994, and was decorated by the U.S. Army for his work in the Ukraine in 2003. He currently is the owner of Preddy Safe Enterprises, which specializes in wilderness and remote first aid and wilderness survival instruction, and a first aid company, Northern First Aid Limited. Preddy Safe Enterprises is also the Canadian Red Cross Instructor Development Center for Newfoundland and Labrador. Michael is an avid historian and has a passion for Newfoundland and Labrador history. He founded the Trail of the Caribou Research Group, whose mission is to remember what Newfoundlanders accomplished in foreign wars. He is a member of several historical groups in Newfoundland and Labrador, England, and Belgium, and very notably, he was recently awarded the Order of Newfoundland. Major Preddy currently lives primarily in Portugal with his wife and 2 daughters, and his eldest daughter lives in British Columbia. And so on that note, I think we'll turn it right over to our speakers and their talk here tonight. And thank you all again for attending.
You hear me okay? So it's Portugal Cove. I wish I lived in Portugal right now. So thank you for this kind invitation. The jet lag's killing me though, I'm really tired. Yeah, so Ian, before we start, we've got it kind of broken up into a kind of like what we're doing and why we're doing it, but how did we get to this point, and a little history about the Commonwealth War graves, and just it'll flow nice and good, and we'll get through it, and we'll have lots of questions in the end, we hope. I just asked Ian a question. I wrote the answer on my hand because I didn't know.
Right. So thanks for coming. Just a couple of definitions to start with. So when we talk about Newfoundlanders, what we're talking about is those who served in any branch of the Newfoundland combatant forces, forestry, Newfoundland Regiment, Naval Reserve, Merchant Marine. Also those born in Newfoundland who may have served in other groups across, and there are some who worked in Newfoundland. They weren't born here, but they worked here and left from Newfoundland to go and serve in different forces. So we've all included those as quote-unquote Newfoundlanders. As well, although Newfoundland and Labrador is our province, you will often see Newfoundland referred to on its own, mainly because that's what was used at the time of the Great War. Second thing, and the other thing, just so it doesn't get too confusing, technically, all those on Beaumont Hamel are those who have no known grave. You'll also hear the term unknown soldiers or unknown grave. that technically refers to gravestones that will have a soldier of the Great War known unto God. Technically, that would be a unknown soldier or an unknown grave. But the terminology gets moved back and forth, and unfortunately, all three terminologies are used for the same thing. So basically, somebody who does not have a gravestone with their head on it and are listed on one of the memorial stones.
Of course, it's not going to work. Oh, I need to be able to pace. Okay, here we go. What's that? You can do that? Okay, and I'll do it for you. So, Great War happens. During the Great War, there's all kinds of people being killed. And some of them can't be identified for various reasons. A lot of them couldn't be identified because they weren't reburied or buried properly until the war was over. So this is just a brief history of the Commonwealth War graves. Oh, I got it now. I'm good. It's working now. So it was a royal charter in 1917. That's a picture of the charter. But the way it works today is every country contributes to the budget of the Commonwealth War Grave Commission based on the number of dead and a percentage of that budget that they look after. Okay. 1.7 million men and women from the Commonwealth who lost their lives in both world wars. So it doesn't include Korea. So Richard Kipling coined the known unto God phrase, and that's right here. And here you'll see a soldier of the Great War of the Newfoundland Regiment. So why does it just say an unknown soldier? Because when they found the body and dug it up, they couldn't identify who it was, but they knew he was a Newfoundlander because of the medal on his uniform or the buttons. So here we have this cemetery just outside. Is that Novitch is up in Belgium, right? Okay. And there's 3 soldiers buried here in this one grave. Okay, and sometimes they did that. There's one British grave that says 37 unknown soldiers of the British Army, and they're all with one headstone. Sometimes they found them together. Sometimes they couldn't really tell which part belonged to which part, so they said, right, we'll put them here. Other ways that people could remember or be commemorated was through medals, or what we commonly refer to as the death penny. And these are interesting because I've seen them all over the place. I've seen them embedded in the headstones over here, which is odd because there's no Newfoundlander from the First World War that died here, unless he died at home from wounds later. That might be it. So, May 11th, 1917, dear Edward Pretty, Capitol Arm, Trinity Bay. I regret to inform you that the Record Office in London officially reports that number 2276, Private John Pretty, missing April 14th. Upon receipt of further information, I shall immediately wire you. So every time somebody was killed or went missing, this happened. Right? After July 1st, probably from like July 8th onwards, 150 families got this just from the unknowns. When you look through the service file, you'll see here, right, missing in action in France and all the different places he went. And then here's a letter from his mom asking for his picture back. Because a lot of times, the only pictures that people had were the ones taken before they left and given to the families. So they would collect these pictures, one copy, go over to France and go, is that him? Don't know. So this is a mother trying to get that picture back. Okay, please give me some information to where it is. I'd like to get it back as a treasure, as we will treasure it very much. Kindly, Miss Edmund Pretty, Chapel Arm, Newfoundland, Trinity Bay. That's my great Uncle John. My license plate is 2276. That was a long story. So the way he was commemorated in 2009, 9 was we did up a little frame with all these things in it, right? This is where he went missing at Monchi. That's the closest unknown soldier's grave from near Monchi. And then that's the picture because the mom got it back, right? And it was put in a book. So this is one way they commemorated it. And this is a history of the action at Monchi and some other stuff we talk about. And I donated that on the 20th of October 2006 to the town of Chapel Arm. And this is one way to commemorate him. But that was, 99 years after he died, or, Dear Mrs. Pretty, the above-mentioned soldier was reported as missing on April 14th and subsequently reported as killed in action. His mother has written to the department requesting that the photographs sent to her should be returned. I should be glad, therefore, if you have this photograph. So all the photographs were returned to a central place, and they were returned. So this is, although that's not Mrs. Pretty, it's reference Private Pretty. So one of the weirdest things I ever did is my dad and I went to this war memorial in Normanscove for all the communities together. And when my dad and I went, we noticed that they had already put his name on there. A bit creepy. He said, Dad, your name's in the war memorial. Usually you don't put them on until after you pass, but they decided not to. And here you can see right here where they commemorated him. So that's just a story of a personal story to me. And that's his brother Edward. He was in the Forestry Corps. He died of sickness when he came home, but he still has a Commonwealth War grave in Chapel Arm. So that is what happened hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, right? And Beaumont Hamel alone, there was 150 that have no known grave. And I think you're up.
Okay, so as Michael says, so Beaumont Hamel, for example, was July 1st, 1916. Most of those burials didn't happen until November. So most of the bodies were hard to recognize. And the problem that happens is that the battles flow back and forth. So people get buried under the ground, a wooden cross is put up with whatever's available, and it's lost. And so there are Newfoundland soldiers who we have the coordinates of where they were buried. There was a minister there who helped bury them from a different regiment, but their bodies were never found. So I have helped some people, families in Newfoundland, find the coordinates based on the original maps and the GPS maps, and they go to the spot where their loved one is actually buried, but there is no recognition of that. Classic example of that would be Captain James Ledingham in Legeham, and another one would be John Shywock, who is actually, as far as I can tell, buried under a schoolyard at the moment.
So that's an interesting story because you looked at the map references before, and the Padre who reported where they buried Shywock and I think 7 others. If you take the G, because it's a grid square, something G, and that's like way behind enemy lines, which makes no sense. But if you change the G to a C, it's exactly where the stray around hit them, right next to where the sugar beet factory was, and it makes sense. So somebody made a lazy C, and people said, "Oh, they were buried up there." It's not the case.
So, our numbers, unknowns by the numbers. Numbers are the devil, and the problem is you always keep chasing them. We continue to find more and more, particularly people who are in other, like the British Army, the American Army, that sort of thing. So this project will never be finished per se. There are 400, if you look at Beaumont Hamel itself, which are supposed to be all the Newfoundlanders with unknown graves or no known graves, there's 593 that are listed in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, but 5 of them were found after the war and dug up. Most of them were then buried in Sayre No. 2 Cemetery, 4 of them, and Martin Cal was buried in London Cemetery Extension nearby. And of course, in 1916, they found Private Lambert, who is now a burial. Their names are still on Beaumont Hamel, and of course, the replica of Beaumont Hamel in Barring Park. For the merchant marines, there was one sailor who died, and they actually went back to Carbonear, buried him, and went ahead. So he's on the merchant marine. And interestingly, of the Georgina, there were 6 soldiers who were actually, or 6 sailors who were actually rescued. Nobody is quite sure why they got labeled on the Beaumont Hamel Memorial, but they did. They all ended up coming home and subsequently died later. So numbers a little bit off. The Royal Newfoundland Naval Reserve, they were all, nobody was missing there. There is a double listing. Harold Blackhall, I think, was the one who's listed on the wall at Tynecott, the biggest British cemetery, but he's also listed on Beaumont Hamel as well. So if you fiddle with the numbers, there are, instead of being 821 total on Beaumont Hamel, there are actually 809. But there are other unknowns from World War I in a number of other memorials throughout France and Belgium. Vimy Ridge in the Canadian Army has 63, for example. Meningate has 31 Canadians and 1 in the British Army. And with 1 degree of separation, the 1 in the British Army is my great uncle, Richard Hayward Taylor, from Harbour Grace, Carbonear, who joined the Canadians in Montreal. Tower Hill, a lot of Newfoundland sailors were in the British Merchant Marine, and there's 23 listed on Tower Hill next to in London.
There's 2 on the Lusitania, which is the ship they sank that brought the U.S. into the war finally.
In the Chatham Naval Memorial, there are 6, including one I'll talk about, who was actually in the Naval Air Service. Plymouth Memorial has 3 from the Royal Navy, Portsmouth 1. Halifax is interesting. There are probably more than 4. They're a little bit hard to chase. There's a ship called the Dunelm, which was sunk. Nobody is quite sure whether it was by enemy action or by storm, but the powers that be in the Commonwealth War Graves considered it by enemy action. There is a Job Kane from Brookfield, Wesleyville area, who died, and I believe, and can't find his birth certificate, but I believe he's probably the youngest Newfoundlander. He was a 14-year-old cabin boy who died. I'm still looking for that birth certificate. Poisiers, there's 2 that were in the British Army. Vis-en-Artois, again, the British Army, and Faubourg-d'Amain in Arras, another one in the British. So there's 145 other Newfoundlanders who have no known grave.
From the First World War.
Yeah, Second World War's, that's the next project. So these are the major memorials to the missing World War I and II. And you can see even down in Tunisia there. Second World War, Singapore and Rangoon. This is more apropos to the First World War, and these are some of the ones in England. This is a channel here and over in France, Meningate, Vis-en-Artois.
That's Vimy down there.
Vimy down here with Beaumont Hamel.
Tynecott and Beaumont Hamel. No, Vimy's up here, so right?
Yeah.
But that's Tynecott and not Tynecott, wait for it. Beaumont Hamel, Deep Val, yeah, those places.
So that's Beaumont Hamel. And just quickly going through the memorials, have Deep Val. Deep Val is there. People are familiar with Vimy. The Meningate and the ceremony that happens every night with the bugler. The Newfoundland Highlanders Pike Band was fortunate in 2004 to be the invited guests to play under that during the ceremony, and I was honored to play the lament during that ceremony. There's Tower Hill in London, the Chatham Naval Memorial, the Halifax Memorial, Plymouth, Poisiers, Portsmouth, Vis-en-Artois, Faubourg-d'Amain. So overall, 809 men from Newfoundland and Labrador who served in Newfoundland units are commemorated out of a total of 1,644 or so. If we take all the combatants and all the forces, at the moment, we have 954 that have no known grave. But of the 586 soldiers from Beaumont Hamel, that's the 592 minus the 6. I hope I'm not confusing you with the numbers, but maybe I am. There are at least 162 that are in fact buried. They have gravestones that say a Newfoundland soldier of the Great War. And these graves are spread throughout France and Belgium. The other thing is that the Newfoundlanders wore British uniforms. And at a certain period of time, they did not have the Caribou badge. They had the Imperial cipher with Newfoundland, but some of them had just the Imperial cipher. So if you lost your hat, you lost your badges on your shoulder, wearing a British uniform, they could be a Newfoundlander. We'll never know from any of those. That's just the list of unknown. The Commonwealth War Graves, as far as we can figure out, lists about 130 unknown or Newfoundlanders with no known gravestones. The Trail of the Caribou has found 160, and we're still looking. And basically, the way that the records at the moment are set up, you actually have to go in and look at the graves one by one, because Newfoundlanders get listed sometimes as British, sometimes as Canadian, and they don't list the soldiers with no known graves at the start of a cemetery list or online. So you actually physically have to go in, and that's what we've been slowly but surely doing.
So it's been interesting because when we first started this, the database wasn't that good online, and we're just doing a long day. And I said, well, there's the cemetery. Let's stop and have a cold water. We'll walk around. And I see this caribou head. I went, oh, pull up my master list. There's nobody in there. And I go over and it's an unknown soldier of the Newfoundland regiments. Well, why is that? So when we contacted the Commonwealth War Grave, they had a list of maybe 70 or 80 at that time. That's getting better. So what we started to do, and Neil's been with me and several times, we stop and we say, right, and we just go. We go down every line and record. So we record it, the plot, the row, and what stone all these Newfoundlanders are in. So of that 500 and some odd that are missing, we actually know where 162 of them are buried. But they're not going to do DNA and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting that we're now telling them where Newfoundlanders are buried. But if you look online, in the burial book, it'll say 14 unknowns of the British Army. So we will definitely go to that cemetery because a lot of times they're Newfoundlanders, or 12 unknowns of the Canadian Army and they're Newfoundlanders, because we're all mixed in. So we've been writing the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and the next time they replace that plaque on the wall and when they redo their book, they'll be listed as Newfoundlanders. Because we were on Dominion then, right?
So,
So I'm having a brain fart again. So we know the names listed: Beaumont Hamel Memorial are commemorated on the Barring Park and the Newfoundland and Labrador Books Remembered. So there's one in the main hall when you came in, right? So we're cross-referencing a lot of lists and stuff. So the project we have is to discover where all of the memorials in Newfoundland are and the different types. So tonight we're going to show you those. So if you're ever traveling around and you go, oh, there's a memorial, I wonder if they know about that. Take my card, please, and just tell us. Don't say in the United Church in Gatown, Upper Island Cove, because there might be 5 of them. So like street addresses and stuff like that. But we're going to show you all the different kinds that we have found, and some of them are just interesting in how people commemorated their missing. This is a map. So remember I was talking to you about SA Block 23C. That's how they did it. But all of these blue numbers are the amount of bodies they found in that 250 square meter piece of earth after the Battle of the Somme. Let that sink in. 250 square meters, and there's 182, 211, and 69. Right? So when Nangle went over with his, Padre Nangle went over with his group, that was a big job. And it must have been, I cannot imagine going through that and what you would come out of that with, right? So now this is your party.
Okay, so in 1917, you could see already there were two kinds of commemoration. So we're looking at those who have no known graves. Of course, if you've been in Newfoundland cemeteries, there's lots of commemoration of Newfoundland soldiers, some who died in Newfoundland, but also those who were buried in France and their families commemorated them. So similarly, we're looking at those with no known graves who were commemorated on a number of things. It could have been, if you go to Dildo Brewery, I believe they have from the Loyal Orange Lodge out there, they have a list of those. And sometimes the list is those who died, sometimes those who served. The churches in St. John's, all the older churches, either had paper or plaques. There's a number of different ways that they listed those. So by 1917, there was a market for this, and good businessmen always take a market. So you can see here, here's Muir's, and it looks very familiar. They didn't tend to go for the can and after, but the caribou badge is fairly consistent on many gravestones around St. John's and around the province that were supplied. And that was in August of 1917. And one of their competitors, John Kelly, was in fact the carver at that time. And he's the one that did most of the caribous. And he joined Muir's. Probably a good move since Muir's is still working at the moment. So you can see in the middle, just here, this is Skinner's, another company, special designs for soldiers and also some beautiful designs in church and lodge memorial tablets. And again here in Chislett's soldiers and sailors. And some of these headstones, if you go to the cemeteries, down at the very bottom, you can see the manufacturer's names. So here's an example from the Belvedere Cemetery, the Dunphy brothers, John Dunphy and Edmund. Edmund was killed at Monchy. John was killed at Les Bouffes in November 29th, 1916. And so this is a family gravestone. They've put the Newfoundland crest, and this particular one was partially painted by presumably some family members. But you can also see another example. We forget about the books of remembrance, but they're there, Confederation Building. They're upstairs in the lobby of the Memorial University as well, and you can access them online as well. In the middle there, you can see these two brothers' names on Beaumont Hamel. Beaumont Hamel has, in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment alone, has 16 brothers who died, some on the same day. And if you look further, it gets a little bit trickier trying to relate back and find the records. But there are naval reservists whose brother was in the Newfoundland Regiment, Merchant Marine whose brother was in the regiment, etc. These are the Ferguson brothers. Roy was second lieutenant. His brother Stuart was a sergeant. Their father came over from Scotland, from Cooper Angus, to work for Reed, Newfoundland. Roy Ferguson was married and working in Grand Falls. Stuart worked in St. John's and had been in Whitburn as well. And they were both killed on July 1st. They both have no known grave. So they're commemorated on the Books of Remembrance, obviously in the replica in Bowring Park. At St. Andrew's Church, you can see by the star there, there's Roy Ferguson and Stuart Ferguson. The other plaque, so this is for members of the congregation. The other plaque at St. Andrew's is members of the Newfoundland Highlanders, and Stuart Ferguson was a member of the Newfoundland Highlanders. He's on that plaque. Roy, living in Grand Falls, is listed on the Grand Falls plaque, which you can see there. And this is the family memorial in the General Protestant Cemetery. The two red stars, it's just a little bit hard to see, but Second Lieutenant John and Stuart, their sister is in between there, their parents on this side. And you can see they have a very interesting caribou above their name. There's not on any other side. It's probably unique from a memorial point of view. And so some families put them on existing memorials of relatives that were there. Some of them, I think, put up new ones, and other ones waited until a member died close to the war and then put the names on those. There are some, though, that is certainly an afterthought, and it's squeezed on wherever they could find space. And this is in Cooper Angus. Because the Stewart brothers, in their early school days, went to public school in Cooper Angus, their names are listed in the middle there. And my wife and I went over to Cooper Angus, took this picture, and their church in Cooper Angus, their Ballantine War Memorial window is exactly the same as that in St. Andrew's Church here in St. John's. Same Scottish stained glass window. And there are descendants, or I should say relatives, not descendants. There are relatives of the Fergusons who still go to St. Andrew's Church.
So has anybody been counting how many times those two have been remembered and other people have not? It's interesting how the Fergusons were probably well off. They could afford all that fancy artwork and stuff. But what we've been noticing is that people are putting in memorials now to that, or having these columns like this, the obelisk like that. As I go around to cemeteries, much to my kids' horror, because they're usually with me, you see new etchings in there to our Uncle Pat, who never came home from the war or killed in action or missing. So they're still going on today, adding things to different things.
And this is just another example. As I mentioned before, Captain James Ledingham, who was killed October 9th, 1917. And there's, I think, 9 or 10. I'm not quite certain of the cemetery in England, but there are 9 other memorials from them. Now, he's interesting in terms of he's commemorated on both the Methodist College Memorial, which is now in Prince of Wales Collegiate, and the St. Bond's Memorial, because he went to both schools. He's on the Highlanders plaque, the St. Andrew's Congregational plaque, Beaumont Hamel, Barring Park, a church where his family, the previous generation, had been in New Brunswick, in the General Protestant Cemetery, the Books of Remembrance, and maybe in England as well. This is an example from Port Rexton, one of my favorite cemeteries to walk through. My wife and I often walk through cemeteries.
I fear one day we're not going to come out.
So this was George Barber. He was a naval reservist, and you can see here. It's a little bit hard to see. It's right down at the bottom.
Yeah, so it's up here, right?
And that's the higher one. So that's George Barber. His gravestone says that he died on November 12th. And the Commonwealth War Graves suggest it was November 10th. Regardless, it was right at the end of the war. He was in the Dardanelles mining on a trawler that was retrieving mines from the Dardanelles, and they got unlucky and hit a mine and it exploded. So he got placed after his father died in 1923 on that memorial. He's on the War Memorial there as well in Port Rexton. This is the only Air Force one that I can find. Lieutenant Avery, who was born in Greats Cove. They moved after a couple of years to Toronto, and he's commemorated both on the Methodist Church in Toronto, also his high school in Toronto, and also on the Chatham War Memorial. He's one of the Newfoundlanders there. He died when his plane crashed into the sea in May 14th, 1917. And the interesting thing is, although he was only 2 when he left Newfoundland, he went overseas with a detachment of the Newfoundlanders and was temporarily attached to the Newfoundlanders in order to be in a military organization to go across on the ship to England. And this is a merchant seaman in the General Protestant Cemetery. This one you would never know was associated with the First World War. It just says, Father James Barrett, lost at sea, January 1st, 1918. And he died on the SS Beverly when it was sunk as a merchant marine, leaving a wife and, I believe, somewhere between 4 and 6 children. This is John Hollins, and his gravestone is in Carbonear. And he was with the Canadian. He was living in Canada at the time, and he was with the Canadian Expeditionary Force. He is the first Newfoundlander that we know of that was killed in combat on land. There was a seaman killed in September, and there's, of course, Samuel Hemmel, who died of disease in September of 1914 en route to St. John's from Labrador.
He's buried in Coley's Point, and it was Ian's father, David, who figured this out and had his grave made into a Commonwealth War grave.
Yeah. And that's, Hollins is listed on the Menin Gate. So when you do go to the Menin Gate, there are Newfoundlanders there. Newfoundland is not just Beaumont Hamel, it's these other memorials. And this is one of my favorite, again, from Port Rexton. So this is an unofficial unknown. Reuben Plowman served initially in the Royal Naval Reserve, and after his 1-year service, as he was allowed, he was discharged. Many naval reservists did this because you got paid more in the Merchant Marine than you did in the Naval Reserve for the same danger, in theory. Unfortunately, he was going from North Africa back to Scotland on the SS Larch Grove. It was a merchant fleet auxiliary ship, and it was struck by an American naval supply vessel, the USS Hawaiian. And there were naval reservists on the SS Larch Grove that were manning the gun. So there were actual serving members who manned the gun. There was one gun on this ship as a defensive measure. Those naval reservists are commemorated by Commonwealth war graves. But a merchant marine, because it was not an enemy action, they are not commemorated anywhere other than his gravestone, which is commemorated in Port Rexton and unfortunately has fallen down. Now, I happen to know, because there's 1 degree of separation, I happen to know his family, and we'll see if we can get that fixed.
We did approach the town a few years ago about putting up a memorial and fixing this, but the person who was really excited about it retired. And then COVID comes along, so we're going to re-engage to get Mr. Plowman properly recognized out there.
Okay, I'll try to go through this relatively quickly. So the so-called mystery of Serinvillers. Serinvillers is a community near Cambrai in France. And you can see there were letters written after the war by Nangle. Nangle was looking for the report of 22 Newfoundland soldiers who were supposedly buried in the German cemetery at Serinvillers by the Lower Alsatian Regiment. It went out in the paper in 1920 and then in 1921 again. And nobody initially could put any information on it whatsoever. In 1922, a report came that they had been found, and it contained the graves of 22 Newfoundlanders who had died in captivity. Nangle, though, in actual fact, despite the fact they may have said it was found, those graves and Serinvillers, nobody knows where they are. If you go to the Commonwealth war graves, this is Cambrai, and you can see down here the stars would be Marcoing and Masnieres, which is where the Newfoundlanders were. If you look here, this is Serinvillers. There's actually an airfield here, modern day, Second World War in modern day, and Serinvillers is here. Now, the problem is that according to the Commonwealth war graves, there were 4 soldiers, only 4 soldiers in the whole British Army who were buried at Serinvillers and were then reburied, because they often concentrated graves, they reburied one of them in Haneki. Now, the soldier that got reburied were soldiers who fought side by side with the Newfoundlanders, and they all died between December 1st and December 3rd, 1917. And so this soldier from the Royal Guernsey Light Infantry is the only one that we can trace and move from Serenvillers to Haneki. We have a theory, because we don't know where those Newfoundlanders were reburied, but we have a theory because there are 17 gravestones of Newfoundland soldiers with no known graves in a cemetery called Flesquires, which is down here by the Cambrai tank. And there are 17, there's a Newfoundlander by the name of Cook who's buried there, who died in early December. And what I have tried to do, so this is a picture from the Guernsey Historical Society. This girl working for the Salvation Army was tending this grave of a Guernsey Light Infantry soldier at Serenvillers and was sent back. So that's one documentation that the cemetery existed. This is the other. These are the four soldiers. One is unknown Air Force, two are unknown Air Force. This Company Sergeant Major Bachman from the Royal Guernsey Infantry and McCluskey from the West Yorks. This fella here, Bachman, is the closest to the Newfoundlanders, and you can see they were from the cemetery Serenvillers. Now that gives a map reference, which ends up being very valuable to us. So you can plot it on the original maps and then overlay it on the modern maps and find out where Serenvillers is. So that's the Flesquire Cemetery, and that's Serenvillers Cemetery, which is at the end of a runway, is now a farm today. And that's where we would believe the Newfoundland Regiment soldiers are buried. And
Are buried or were buried?
Well, probably were buried.
Yeah.
This information came back to Newfoundland, but was slow coming. It took about 6 to 8 months. And you can see here from Mount Carmel Cemetery, this is Thomas Lynch, who died on December 3rd, 1917. And his family was told they were buried at Serenvillers. So this is a family memorial, and it lists Serenvillers as his place of burial in France. This is another. This is Charles Cheater, although in his file in the Newfoundland Regiment, he's listed under Chater. And this is the United Church Cemetery in Greenspond. And again, he's listed as being in Serenvillers Cemetery. This is the Red Cross, the German Red Cross records from the International Red Cross. And you can see, a little hard to see, but these are all Newfoundland. So that's Chater, Backers, that's the wrong name, but Rose, and there's another one down here, Kane. So you can see here, Cheater is listed as being, and basically the translation is, these are buried in Serenvillers German Cemetery at the top. So we do have those records. It's been of interest there's a master's student, Andrew Ballum, who has written on this in 2022. We had started our search for this in 2014, and progress tends to be slow. When you go down a rabbit hole, you do a lot in a short time, and then you let it lie for a long time. Most people in this room, I'm sure, would have experienced that. So one of the things they did, probably a mistake, but nevertheless, the reason people had 2 dog tags was you take one from the body and send it to the officials, and the other one you leave on the body so you can identify it later on. Unfortunately, the Germans took both dog tags off all the soldiers and sent them to the International Red Cross, who then sent them back to the family. And there's about 16 of them that in their files say they received them. The only one we know about here is Frank Sims, whose family received, hard to read, but that is Frank Sims' dog tag from Buren, and the family have it and have donated it to the Royal Newfoundland Regiment Museum. So we have his dog tags, and here's a picture of Frank.
Okay, it's me.
Back to you.
So what's interesting about Sarah Villers is he went and told me about it, so I had to go. Is that they died of wounds right after the Battle of Cambrai, which is we call Manière. Arlene King told me how to say Manière. You can say Pierre, you can say Manière. I have dyslexia at ADHD, that's why I'm always spinning around. Any spelling mistakes are my fault. We found most of them. So the German Red Cross so when the battle happened, and then they were pushed back, so the Newfoundlanders who were wounded or who were found dead by the Germans were buried. The wounded weren't buried. A lot of them died of wounds within the first 3 or 4 days after the Battle of Cambrai. Right? So they're all buried behind German lines in this cemetery. When the war ends, they're putting people in collection cemeteries. So they find somebody on the edge of a wood line, right, we're going to pull him up, we're going to record it, and we're going to put him over there. But because the bodies were stripped of all of their identification, and I don't think it was there was ill intent. I think they just wanted to preserve it and tell their families where they were buried, so they took everything. And when they were dug up and they were moved, there's no record of them. So why? So we need to go into the Commonwealth War Cemetery and go into that German regiment and have a look as to what happened and where it is. So, because if we can prove that those 17 are part of those 22, we might be able to get them recognized a bit more specific, because you can put cairns in cemeteries saying believed to be buried in the cemetery. Right? But why is there 17 unknown Newfoundlanders that appeared after the war in this cemetery, and there's no record where they came from, and there's about 17 from the cemetery over here, and it's relatively close. So that's the mystery of that.
One thing I'll point out to that, it's interesting that, again, rabbit hole chasing this down the other day, I came across from a POW, Private Hartley, who was asked by Sim's sister if he could ask the Germans about the people from Villers. And in fact, from prison, he sent a letter to the Newfoundland government saying he'd spoken to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross said, yes, they were at Villers, and that's where they were buried. So it's interesting. He got that information from inside POW through the Red Cross.
Neat. So this young man told me several years ago about this headstone. And what's interesting is that we kind of found it. Part of it was buried. We dug it up, had to look at it. And Trail to Care Research Group, this is the kind of work that we do. And then we got a replacement headstone made. That's the Baldwin's direct descendants. But it's an interesting thing because when they buried this fella, and there's like some handsome piper guy there. So this is the ceremony a few years ago in that, obviously in the cemetery, about rededicating and redoing this headstone that we put up. So there were 3 brothers, one in the British Army, one in the Canadian Army, and one in the Newfoundland Regiment. All were killed during the war. None of them have a known grave. Their first cousin, killed in the war, does not have a known grave. There's one on Vimy, 2 on the Menin Gate, and 1 on Beaumont Hamel. Quite the story. So you can get into a lot of, this is just the details of them. But those memorials, the reason we're trying to identify them is so that we can come up with a preventative maintenance plan or replacement plan to make sure they're not lost. As if you hadn't have found that headstone half sticking up out of the mud and then dug it up and went, oh, look at this, we never would have known that existed. Right? So registered charity, we fundraise, we give tax receipts, and we do this kind of stuff. Another thing that we do is we'll put a footstone on veterans' graves if it doesn't say they were a veteran. Right? And we've done that. We've done 80 odd of them. We placed a footstone on Moray from Ferryland, who was buried in British Columbia, who was part of the Third Red River Expedition as part of the Louis Riel rebellions. Found him, right? So he lived the war. So here's churches, okay? So here you've got a church in Grand Falls, Windsor, and there it has a memorial to them. But here, you can't see this, lists all the names of those who served and those who died, and there's usually an asterisk by them if they have no known grave. So, for example, Walter Greeley, this is Portugal Cove, World War II, but if you go down here, where's missing, killed in the USA, and missing. Right, so David King from the Royal Navy has no known grave, World War II. So this is the kind of stuff we're looking for. Stained glass windows, plaques. This is called All Around the Circle. This is in Harbor, Maine. This is where it's the Catholic Church where you get the, I don't know the name of that, altar, but you eat the host. Okay. Communion, there you go. I used to be an altar boy like years ago. So this is all the ones who fell. So when you go up there, I was in the church like looking for plaques and stuff. And I went, oh, and I kind of leaned over and stretched my back. And I went, oh, look at this. So a lot of this stuff is like fluke, right? Not intent. This is an interesting story. I was told there was a plaque in this church. This is the stone church in Ferryland, right? Chris Morey, avid researcher from Ferryland, said he could never find it. So I'll find it. So I'm down at Ferryland. I think I've got some comfortable ways going through the Ferryland Lighthouse I don't want to do that again because I've done it like 50 times. So I'm looking around and the caretaker, he goes, what are you looking for there, buddy? And I said, I'm looking for this plaque. He goes, oh. He goes up to the tabernacle, what do you call it? The big table, tabernacle. And he lifts up the sheet and there it is, drilled into the side of the sheet. So rabbit hole. Here's the article in the Veteran from 1960s when they put it in there. Yeah? So don't be afraid to lift up sheets and look at the sides of that. This is the Chuck brothers. They were from Russia. The top part of the stone is his brother, the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and the bottom part is Private George Chuck, who was killed in Monchy and missing in action. Right, so you'll see that kind of stuff. This one here is, I don't know the names of all the different religions. This is in the one by the penitentiary. So I'm walking by.
Anglican Forest Road Cemetery.
And you told me that like 2 nights ago, and it's. My dad says I always had a memory like sheep shit, short and lumpy. But on the side of this, look at that. Also, Private Ernest L. Chafe killed in action July 1st, 1916, age 24 years old. Even though they're not missing, there's still a memorial. So we want to know where those are. We want to be able to look at them. If you go in that cemetery whose name you just said, there's so many that are faded and it's even hard to read them. So we're trying to figure out what it says and maybe we can replace them one day. This is up in St. Anthony or St. Anthony, because I'm out from that way. And this is to Private George R. Sims, killed in action July 1st, 1916. So all these headstones you see where it says to and killed, they're not there because none of the bodies were brought home. So this is a memorial. Edric Patrick Simmons, 72nd Battalion, who was gassed and wounded in Ypres and died in Holyrood, August. So he's actually, that's a headstone to a soldier who was not in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, but he's buried at home because he got gassed, came home and died. Right? This one here is Joseph Patrick Bartlett. It's hard to see, but this is the death penny I was talking about. Yeah. There was a couple of them out near Dildo area, and people stole them and then sold them. People said, "What's this?" Gave it back to the museum, and then the family wants it back, so it's not stolen again. Anyway, I said, and they tried to get me involved, and I said, no, you could do your own thing. So you'll see all these like things, but look at how old this stone is. We're okay for time. And then sometimes you got to cut them out and dig them. I was going, this is out by Brigus, and I'm popping along and I'm like looking around and said, ah, this grave is all overgrown. So I move it back and I see it. So we take out our cutters and our shears. And then this is to the family. But then on the bottom, it says Sergeant John Joseph, who was killed in. I don't know why PowerPoint does this, but. So sometimes it's just in the bottom of the stone. But what gives it away and what's really recognizable is that symbol. Okay? Bertha Bartlett, who was a nurse, has that symbol for some reason. Merchant mariners who were buried up in Ireland that Neil found for us have a caribou. So we're going to get all that fixed because we don't. If you're in the Navy, you should have the anchor knot. So our unknown soldier. Okay. This is the first one. He came to England with a crusader shield and a crusader sword. There was 5 of them brought into a room, laid out. King was blindfolded. He came in, put his hand on one, and that was how they chose him. So like a triple double blind or whatever you would call it. So when we brought ours home, we were playing with what kind of crest should we use and what kind of stuff should we use. And I'm proud to be part of this. So if you look at the Royal Newfoundland Regiment crest, so this here, that is the thing that we put on on the Commonwealth War Grave thing. Is it there? No. Okay, so we created this. This is the final version of that crest, like this. Okay, and then we created a commemorative coin with the crest on one side and this on the other, and an explanation of what it is. And on the other side in the card, it comes with it is a picture of them carrying his casket out of Beaumont Hamel, because that's where the French army turned it back over to the Newfoundlanders, but Canadian army. And then a picture of his headstone. And yeah. So interesting stuff. And then it's like Newfoundland granite and Labradorite and Morgan McDonald's beautiful artwork. Let's read this for a second. Let it sink in. Because it's interesting that Ian came up with this. And you mentioned this to Canadian Army friends, like, no, was it? Yes. Because how many times have you traveled around the world and there's somebody from home there, right? Everywhere. Hammered after a rugby tournament at a bar in Berlin, they had to fly us into because the Iron Curtain still existed, and the bartender was from Newfoundland. I had the honor of being on his vigil, right next to this young lady here. Questions?
The only
You want to talk about this cemetery here?
no, there you
So
go.
2 soldiers of the Great War, Newfoundland Regiment. 2 soldiers of the Great War, Newfoundland Regiment. 2 soldiers of the Great War, one's a Newfoundlander. So these are all in a line. So the Commonwealth War Graves, if you were a battlefield cemetery, like when you go to Tyncott, the top part is all mishmashy, there's people all over the place and there's no reason to it, then it gets very organized, right? If you go to the coast of France, they're buried in chronological order. Well, how do they do that? Because it was a field hospital. And they dug a big long trench, they put them in, filled it up, stuck a name, next one that died. So their dates of death are chronological. Very neat, very pristine, very tidy. Right? So it's interesting how we do that. And I don't know, is that? Look at this is backwards now. How did that happen? Is that Knightsbridge?
It could be, or it could be Sear.
Yeah, no, it is Sierra, because there's a whole bunch of them in Sierra Road number 2. So interesting enough, whoever dug the cemetery got to name it. So there's one really cool one I take people over there when I do tours, and it's Adenac Cemetery. Like, why? Why is it Adinak? It was because it was done by Canadians and take Canada and spell it backwards. Right? So they had a bit of humor about them. And a lot of times, but when you got into the later part of the war, 3 days before the big battle, you went and dug graves and made a cemetery. So with digging your own grave, it literally happened. Right? So now this is the last slide. Yep. Now it's question time, if you have any. How do we do for time?
I think we're great. And also, if you want to have questions, put your hands up so the folks online can hear us as well. And I will come to you with my.
Now we'll have a drink of water. You want water or juice?
Thank you very much for an incredible and very riveting presentation. It's an incredible service you're doing for all of us. I assume you've spoken with Black Cat Cemetery Preservation and alerted them to what you're looking for.
They're members of the Trail to Caribou Research Group.
Excellent.
We've just developed a training video for them because we did a cemetery cleaning
Bingo.
workshop with them 2 summers ago, and they're wonderful people.
And Stone Picks online.
Yes. Yep.
Right, yeah, okay.
Don't fall over. Don't fall over.
Yeah,
Oh.
anyway, thank you. Just curious.
There's 200 and some odd of us in our group. I'm the big giant talking head, and I'm retired so I can travel. But I always tell everybody this: travel is not paid for in our group. If you want to travel and go do stuff, it comes out of your pocket, because that's not what we raise money for. Footstones and educational programs, and there's a brochure here about what we do and my contact information on it.
No, I just wanted to, ask or observe or whatever. I was over there in Beaumont Hamel in 2012, yeah, and summer of 2012, I think it was. Anyway, noticed that on some of those headstones in Beaumont Hamel, there's a British, say, and some of them British and a Newfoundlander buried in the same plot.
Yeah. So so for those online, the question was: some headstones have a British and a Newfoundland soldier, and are they buried in the same plot? So Ian, you want to answer that?
Yeah. So again, part of the problem becomes how much of the soldier they may have found. So if you're, impolitely blown away, you may reduce the size. So and there's also restrictions on the size of the cemetery, etc. So and some of them again may have been buried together in the heat of battle with a wooden cross. And so if that happened at some time early, they are sometimes then just kept the way they are because you can't separate. They know the 2 soldiers that are there, but you can't separate the 2 soldiers, shall we say, in death.
Or it could have been subsequent battles where one died and a couple days later the other one died and they fell on top of each other. But they know which day they went missing. But if they're unknowns, there's no date of death, obviously.
The Newfoundlanders were the only Canadian, quote unquote, regiment from the present day country of Canada who fought on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. The Canadians came in later, but the first day of the Battle of the Somme, it was the Newfoundlanders. And the only North American regiment in Gallipoli were the Newfoundlanders. Now there were other there was a Canadian hospital on Lemnos on the Greek islands, which my great aunt was with.
Beaumont Hamel. So the question for those online was, how many cemeteries are there in Beaumont Hamel? And there's Y Ravine Cemetery, and then there's the artillery circular one, and then there's Hawthorne Ridge.
Yeah.
Right. But in Beaumont Hamel, there are 3 cemeteries in that park. There used to be a second Y Ravine Cemetery, but when they were building the park, they moved all of them over to Ancre.
Well, yeah, it's just outside in the
outside the
field.
park.
You got to go out and then go up there are cemeteries in the middle of fields, and during harvest time, it's interesting.
Yep.
If you speak French, you can speak to the
So
walkers.
in Ancre Cemetery, it's very interesting because they had buried them all, and then towards the end of the war, the Germans made the big counterattack, so that cemetery was blown up. So if you go up into the middle of it, there's a big circle with two half circles and a walkway through the middle. And all on one side are all Newfoundlanders believed to be buried in the cemetery because they knew they were in there, and so they just put up these different types of headstones.
No, yeah, no. Where the only Newfoundlander, well, it's a Newfoundlander that's commemorated, and there are 3 buried in the memorial that we said, the Faubourg d'Arras. That's basically known as an Air Force memorial, but there's in the cemetery that's in front of the memorial, there's a number, and I believe there's 3 Newfoundlanders in the British Army, and there's 1 unknown on the actual Faubourg memorial. It's actually quite close to the Second World War French resistance, which is, if you ever go to Arras, you should make time to go to the moat of the police station. It's an old citadel, and it is incredibly moving.
Communications there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in the community of Arras. Yes. Yeah.
Just outside of Arras, there's Monchy, where there was a big battle there. There's a few buried, but there's a lot of unknowns that came out of Monchy. But if you keep going down the road towards Cambrai, there's a lot.
Major Val Linehan, retired. I recently joined an organization, Last Post Fund, and wondering if you're familiar with it.
Yep. So there's different jobs of different people. So Commonwealth War Graves are there to commemorate war dead. The Last Post Fund's main mission is to ensure that veterans have a proper burial. So they link in with communities and families. So that's when my dad got buried. They helped bury him because he was a veteran. There's also a Last Post group called Unmarked Graves, and they do the unmarked grave things we were talking about earlier, right? And then they used to put footstones on veterans' graves, but it got out of hand because people were just putting footstones. There would be there'd be a headstone saying, Sergeant blah 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 of the regiment of this. And they were putting footstones down, so they stopped doing that. Their job now is to make sure every veteran has some kind of marker, right?
Correct.
So what we do is we bridge that gap now. So like we just put one on Snellgrove, wounded at Beaumont Hamel. That's Snellgrove, the guy in Balleen. Anyway, but it just said his name, Reuben. Anyway, so we'll put that there, and that's free of charge. We do ask people to donate to that. So that's how it all fits in to all that stuff. But we work with them, and I know Jim Lynch very well.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
He's actually the national president at the moment.
Yep.
And he's here from.
He asked me to be part of that, and I said, if I volunteer for one more thing, I will be single.
And I'd like to mention as well that we have a new cemetery in Galway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Been to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Cool.
The other thing, just to supplement that, is that the gravestones, the shapes of the gravestones actually mean different things. So there's the standard, those who are defined as having died during the war, First and Second World War, and then there are those who may have died after, in civilian life, who will get a stone. That technically is not a Commonwealth gravestone. It looks like it. Has to do with the corners. And there's about 10 or 12 different kinds, of which I have not totally memorized them all. But just to let you know that there are different shapes to the Commonwealth War
There's
gravestones.
a Commonwealth War Grave headstone shape for German soldiers. Because they buried a lot of German soldiers, as Germans buried ours. You go into Poland or Berlin when they died of wounds, or one guy died of a train accident. They're buried in a German war cemetery. There's one white headstone, and the Germans put it up, and they look after it, same as we look after theirs.
Hello, my name's John Joya. My question has to do with, well, first of all, to admire the work that you put in trying to identify all these people. And one thing that struck me was the most of the headstones that are in Newfoundland, as you say, they're commemorative. There's no body there, right? But you also mentioned that there was some digging up of bodies. And was that all done just right after the war?
But yes, that's one of the jobs that Padre Nangle did. I think you can speak more about this than I can.
But that must have been an awfully gruesome exercise. I mean, and the state of decomposition of those bodies must have been.
So exactly. So even if you there's a book written by a Seaforth Highlander, Norman. Can't remember his last name. Basically it's his memoirs. He was a young 20-year-old lieutenant in I think the Seaforth Highlanders, and he was at Beaumont Hamel in November of 1916, and it was his job to organize parties to bury mostly Newfoundlanders from the battlefield that had not been able to be buried from July 1st. And the description, and I won't say them here, but he is quite graphic in his descriptions of the decomposition of those bodies at that time. So the same thing happened when Nangle, Murphy was the guy that was with him, and also William Brown, who became the curator, technically the curator at Beaumont Hamel. And although he's buried in Ocean Villers and says from Newfoundland, he was actually a British soldier who served in the Canadian forces and ended up working for Nangle and became the caretaker of Beaumont Hamel from 1926 or 7 onwards until about 1950.
The last question on that is when did the exhumations stop, apart from, of course, the unknown soldier?
So, well, what would happen is, by and large, between 1922 to 24 is when it started, sort of finished. There were excavations afterwards. So, for example, in Beaumont Hamel, when you would have a underground trench that, because of the weather, eroded and collapsed, it sometimes revealed a body. And so that's why the 5 bodies were found that are on Beaumont Hamel, listed on Beaumont Hamel as no known graves. Their bodies were found sometime in 1927, 1928. And so they were reburied at that time. But you can see the confusion, and I'll just read out an example of confusion here. So this was a letter to H. Saunders, who was in the Newfoundland Regiment 1215, and this was in 1927. And so this is a letter to Mr. Saunders. Dear Mr. Saunders, I'm directed to inform you that a grave has been found in Hawthorne Ridge Cemetery, number 2, Ocean Villers, France, bearing a cross inscribed 1215 H. Saunders, Newfoundland. These are evidently intended to be your late regimental particulars and were taken from a waterproof sheet found with the man buried. Can you please give the name and details of any soldier likely to have been in possession of a waterproof sheet which had formerly been your property, who may have been buried in this place? So you can see the confusion. Now, why he may have given it to his buddy because he thought he was going to die and say, keep this for my loved or whatever. But obviously, Mr. Saunders was alive and well and living in Newfoundland.
Or you seem cold, John. Here, have my jacket. And then John gets killed wearing your jacket, and your parents get a telegram saying you're dead, but you're not.
So that's 1927, but most of them were done by then.
They're still finding bodies, and that's usually due to construction, right? That's how they found Lambert's body, and there was NFLD on it. And that's all it is, skeletons and pieces of uniform. Remember the dog tags July 1st were cardboard or cheap leather, so they would have disintegrated.
Forensic anthropologists for that kind of stuff, or it's nothing?
We're just looking where headstones are, and so like in Sarin Villers and in where Shiawak's buried, some British engineer friends of mine, we're trying to get some ground penetrating radar and then permission to go over where we think, and you can tell if there's a cavern down there or not, and there's still a body there. Dr. Goodyear, Heather, Sarah Goodyear, Lockyer. She is the chief scientist that helps identify remains, and she did a really good talk about how they do that. So if you want any more information, like I've got the pages of that young lieutenant's book. I can send you the link for Dr. Lockyer's talk. And yeah, we shared with you this much tonight, right? And we could talk for hours.
One thing I'll just add to that, and you might be going to say it. So she has revealed that they have found 4 more bodies of Newfoundlanders in France. We know they are from the Battle of Guadalcanal. There are 51 unknown or soldiers with no known graves from the battle who died at the Battle of Guadalcanal. So if I do now, DNA is extremely difficult having to do the family tracing, et cetera, but the British Army, huge. Newfoundland, you're talking 4, you're talking 1 in 12. So hopefully, for the family's sake, that they will be able to identify at least 1 or 2 of those soldiers.
And years ago, I remember reading a file somewhere, and I can't find it, about a mom and a mother and a father, and I think it's Guadalcanal. I call it Gudencourt, but because I'm from the Bay, being escorted out of the front lines because they were overlooking for their son's body. And this is like 1917, right? So it's interesting, the stories that are out there. So we're going to start a campaign soon where you can go online and do all this information stuff. We did for the Return of the Unknown Soldier produce a little booklet, a quick and dirty one, and it just talks a bit about what we spoke about tonight, but it lists every picture of every memorial that were Newfoundlanders commemorated on, including World War II we know of so far, and then the detailed list of their hometown, the service number, and where their date of death.
It needs a second edition because there's a few mistakes.
We found, yeah, well, it's coming, but I got 15 more of these to sell, and they're only $15, and they all go towards the charity. So, and the other thing is, I did bring some of these extra coins tonight, the Unknown Soldier coin, and they're $30. Yeah.
The one other thing, just before we close, blatant advertising. Myself and Michael are going to do a talk on another rabbit hole that we're going down because of an association we've made with Air Scotland. So we're doing a talk on the First World War war brides, not the Second World War. They've been well discussed by Barb Barrett in her book, but the First World War war brides, because there's not a whole lot written about that, except what families know, because obviously families know who their grandparents were. And so we're trying to document some of that, and we're doing a talk at St. Andrew's Church on Tuesday, the 17th of February at 7:30 in the evening.
Shareherstory.ca is a website we've produced for specifically this project and another project we're doing with Her Honor, and that is to record the lives and the service of Newfoundland women in military service. We're concentrating on World War I, but there's the different options you can do there. Because we've done all this work, and we've placed all these footstones, and we've done all this stuff, we haven't done a single female yet. Because nobody wants to share that. So we're going to hopefully do Maisie Parsons up in Toronto this year.
My great aunt.
But we can do all kinds of stuff. There's 200 and some odd of us in our group, and we've got people all over the world that help us.
David Newman, question over. Thank you, appreciate it. I'm wondering about when it comes to resettlement in Newfoundland or even the islands that were abandoned, that goes back far enough so that some of those folk, there have been cemeteries that are grown over, and some of the settlements are difficult enough to find, let alone the cemeteries. I'm wondering if you folk have wandered about islands as well.
So both have happened. Some of them, particularly in Salvage area, some of the war memorials have been brought out of the island, out of the churches in the island. But there are some islands, particularly in Placentia Bay, that still have. And I'm trying to remember there's one island in which
Little Bona, Private White.
Yes, one soldier, the Coast Guard went and fixed that memorial up 2 or 3 years ago. So they are there, and if people happen to be there, the other classic is Three Arms. Help me here, somebody. Three Arms Island. Norris. He died, and basically the community died because the merchant family, it was their son, and they basically withered away. So that's another one. There's still a memorial on that island. Yes. Yeah.
There is a fellow by the name of Sevier who was buried in Battle Harbor, and he died when he came home. So if you died like before a certain date in 1920, you were considered war dead if you served. And Sevier is buried there. But if you go to the old Field of Honor, there's a cairn there, and it lists the dead that are commemorated somewhere else. So the Commonwealth War Graves have ceased to go out to all those little islands where there are soldiers who have a Commonwealth War grave, and they did an alternate commemoration in that cemetery. Burnett. Share your story with my card. Barchin Bay? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Very famous. Inside the altar down there, where you go into the bathroom, church and wrong. Yeah, and I met this guy, I didn't know who he was, and later on, I found out, you know, but I think I understand why. Just like you said before, he had it wasn't for college, he said, and you said earlier, he said that he felt guilty for encouraging some of these boys to go over there. You know, being young boys, and he felt guilty about it. Then when he got over there, and he started, after they were having to witness the digging up of their remains, I think that was too much for him.
Yeah, yeah, and that's well documented in Brown's book.
Yep. So
Father Nangle.
what if I told you last April, 2 members of the Trail to Caribou research group went to Kwikwi Cemetery in Zimbabwe, where Nangle is buried, and did some work in his grave and cleared all the brush out and put a beach rock from home in his grave. So we're a beach rock. So all these places we visited, we put a beach rock from home. And we say the ode, and we sing the ode, and we recite the Act of Remembrance. We've done that 2,000 plus times. Any other questions? Wait, I can talk all night.
I got one question from Dale Russell Fitzpatrick online. He wants to say, hi, Mike and Ian, great overview of your work. And he says, for any who have known relatives who have no known graves, and the relatives have done DNA testing, would it help the CWGC to have access to the DNA results?
The CWGC, as my understanding, and maybe Neil can help, does not do DNA testing, but the country that soldier might belong to does. There is a site, and I can share it with you, where Dr. Lockyer, because we just had a Dr. Goodyear join our group, and they're asking Newfoundlanders to go in and tell who your relative is and the connection to them and where they went missing and when. And through their elimination of possibilities, right? If they find a skeleton that was 5'4" and your relative was like 6'1" or 4'8", they're not going to ask for your DNA. But in there, you can give a bunch of information and whether or not you'd like to do a DNA sample, because these 4 people from Gudencourt, because I'm from the Bay, they need your help for that, right? And then people contact me, well, my dad was in the Canadian Army and or my grandfather, and he went missing. Would that help the Gudencourt people? So no, because they were Newfoundland Regiment soldiers. Right, so I can share that with you if you guys want to repost that.
Yeah, and that's really helpful. And also, of course, to anyone listening online and to Dale who asked the question, we also encourage you to get in touch with, obviously, Michael and the foundation, right, for any additional questions or follow-up as well. And the Historical Society will help you if you have any questions or we need to, connect you. Always send us an email as well, and we'll be always happy to link people together. It's one of the things we love to do. Well, thank you so much, Michael and Ian. It's been an incredible evening and a great talk, and we're so glad to have had you here for our lecture series. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you.